welcome to Bury Our Bones with Cinema, the podcast that lives, breathes and dies classic movies, not so classic movies and everything in between. Joining me once again is the Obi-Wan Kenobi to my Qui-Gon Jinn, the wonderfully funny Mr. Simon Keet. In today's episode, we travel back to 1955's The Ladykillers. So join us as we try to con a sweet old lady, dispose of one too many bodies on a passing steam train, and finally try to get away with the perfect heist. This podcast contains spoilers.
How long is this movie?
It's about an hour and 26, so it's a nice short movie. Because I think when you said about it, and when I said, yeah, let's do it, I hadn't looked at the runtime.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that you actually recommended this, because I would never have watched this film, most probably. It wouldn't have been one that I'd have gone, you know what, I'm going to stick on The Ladykillers. So the fact that you'd seen it and you recommended it was actually a blessing in disguise, because I was like, fuck it, why not? Why not? You know, we don't do many films of, older kind of genres, the 50s and 60s we haven't really covered. I don't think we've covered any from the 50s or the 60s. So it's nice to do one from that era anyway. And without you recommending it, it wouldn't have been on my watch list and it wouldn't have been anywhere near, my Blu-ray player. So thank you.
I think the thing that pulls you to it as someone in 2025 is the fact that it's got Obi-Wan Kenobi in it as a character. Yeah. So I tell you how I saw this. I only saw this very recently.
Yeah. Go for it.
So basically, on my birthday, I was looking at things to do. I'd recently connected with my first ever guitar teacher, a man called Mr. Leftov, a Russian man that lives in Bogna and runs a music school there. And he has like a music school that he started and runs. And the sort of the average Joe that goes to this music school now to watch these classical guitar concerts and stuff, just to let you know, by the way, to have this happen, like classical music in Bogna is quite mental. Do you know what I mean? He's made quite an amazing place.
Mm-hmm.
But now they show they every Sunday or every couple of Sundays they show classic movies, or sometimes even more recent movies. They show like Gravity there the other day, and so he said, "Oh, Simon, we have a cinema that we run. You should come down to it." I said, "Okay." And then so he went to the old music school. I took Christina and she met Mr. Leftov. And they were showing this film, The Ladykillers, and they had the DVD. And the pretty average age of the room was, we were bringing it down a bit, but it was probably still like 78.
Yeah.
And, so we watched it with all these people. After we'd watched it, actually, there was a load of cardigans left behind, like Percy. Like, oh, don't worry, that's Pat.
Filled packets of Werther's originals.
Yeah. And then so it was lovely. We watched it with all them. And, a lot of them remember it. Or, some of them, they said, I was old when they were young. It was Christina's granddad said, I remember that one. That was old when I was young. And yeah, I was quite excited about it when I saw like the artwork of it, like these sort of scary looking men. The one with
it's almost Roald Dahl-esque, isn't it?
Yeah.
That artwork, yeah.
And then I'd seen like some, I've seen at one point in my life, I've seen Bridge Over the River Kwai.
Bridge Over the River Kwai, yeah, with Alec Guinness as well.
Probably that's about it. And apart from that, all I have to take, all I know is that Alec Guinness, amazing actor. Why? He was amazing by the time he got to Star Wars. Why? So I don't know. It's mystery. Yeah. Well, he may as well be living in a cave in Tatooine.
That's the thing. There's a reason he was cast in it. I think obviously for people of that generation, but for people of our generation, he is obviously naturally synonymous with Obi-Wan Kenobi. And in some ways that's great, because it means more people will be like, I want to know a bit more about this Alec Guinness fella. But on the other hand, it is going to be a thing of that will probably be all he's really remembered for. And admittedly, before watching this, I think that's the only thing I'd seen him in. It's the only thing I'd ever watched him in was the Star Wars films. So to see him not be these are not the droids you're looking for. You know, the old wise gentleman to be what is a very, very good character actor is a real, I mean, not a surprise, because I always kind of knew it anyway, but to see it in living colour right in front of you is
In
something to behold, really. Yeah, in Technicolor, it's one of those things where I was like, how have I not wanted to watch any more Alec Guinness stuff prior to this? Why is this now the only time? And admittedly, it's my own kind of biases against this sort of era of film, because admittedly it's one of my least favourite eras, and probably just simply down to age. You know, the films that were being made in this sort of era and you know, and earlier is what I call the fast talking area, where, you know, they all spoke with a really significant kind of way of talking. And the reason they did that is because it was cheaper to get more words in on the film, so they had to do it quickly, and that's why they speak like this. And it was a thing of it, that's just how it was done. But this kind of is a little bit like that in places, but in most ways, it's a really modern old film.
It feels, when I saw this, I actually couldn't believe it. To me, it feels like it feels timeless, and I think it's the whole setting of it. I think because it's got that same British humour in it that it's obviously been around for a long time, because it feels a bit not too far away from sort of, not Wicker Man territory. What's the other one? The Cornetto.
Hot Fuzz.
Yeah. It feels like something underneath it, like the politeness of everyone in the world.
Well, you know, but that's one of the biggest things, isn't it? You know, it's a film that's laced with that British politeness, and nobody really wants to say anything. You know, even at the point of these got some very shady bad men, but nobody wants to say anything because that's not the British way. It's that, you know, and actually what's really interesting is I can see so much from the sort of 70s and 80s sitcoms on the BBC. You can see how they were influenced from this. And then naturally you see how, you know, things like Hot Fuzz? The fuck is Hot Fuzz? It sounds like a weird porno. You can see how Hot Fuzz is influenced by those 70s and 80s sitcoms, and obviously it goes back and it goes back and it goes back. But you said this feels like timeless. For me, it felt like a film that, not that I'm saying it doesn't feel like it's made in the 50s, but it feels like it's made by somebody who's trying to make it look like the 50s, but still have a kind of, not a modern take on it, but it's like a nostalgic way of doing it, if you know what I mean. Like the Mrs. Wilberforce's house feels a little bit kind of crooked.
Well, it is. It's got subsidence.
Yeah, but like it feels very much
Burton-y.
Yeah,
to just finish sentences, but
I was struggling to get to it. So thanks for saying Tim Burton. Yeah, it feels like you could quite easily see that in Beetlejuice, or you can see the similarities of, obviously not quite as dark as, when I say dark, I mean visually dark, as Edward Scissorhands and The House at the End of the Road.
I could see this as a, you know, if someone just said, oh yeah, this is a trilogy DVD set and it's got like Edward Scissorhands, one of the other ones, and then this in it, I'd be like, oh yeah, it must be a Tim Burton. Yeah. Obviously, you'd be sold it that way, but to me, there's something weirdly. I don't love all the Tim Burton movies. I like Edward Scissorhands. Not that long ago seen it, to be honest, but this feels like a bit of that weirdness that I can sort of. I don't know. I was very captured by this world, to be honest. Her little house at the end of the road.
Yeah,
that backs onto the station, and she has to use a mallet.
You'd never sell that house, would you? Like, imagine the estate agents coming round and like, how are they going to spin this then? It's like, oh, there's a lovely smoky atmosphere in the air. You know, I think, you know, you hit the nail on the head by saying Tim Burton, because you could quite easily see this being apart from the fact it's obviously not linked to Edward Scissorhands in the slightest, but you can see how this could be theoretically a spiritual, precursor to that.
Yeah.
Because the steam in the background behind the house looks very much like the kind of fog that you see at the house at the end I know they refer to it in a certain way in Edward Scissorhands. Is it just the house at the end of the street?
I don't remember.
But you can almost see the fog around that that spooky, eerily house. You can see it here when there's that the train going past. And what I really, really like about it, and probably is the one thing I do like about those, although I said that it's my least favourite genre, the thing that I've always been quite nice, or things that I always quite like to see, is when you have those old school backdrops, which are clearly not there. They're all, because it's all filmed in a studio.
Poppins or something.
Yeah, they've all got that. It's clearly, it almost feels.
They did film a lot of this in London.
Yeah, you can see that. You can see that. The street feels very real. It doesn't feel like a backdrop that they've got in. I think for me, it you can see this quite easily being, and it has been done, but into a theatre show, into a play. Whether or not it was a play before this or after this, I think it was afterwards.
Yeah, I think it is.
Yeah,
after.
I know there is definitely a play of it, but those backdrops feel very theatre-esque, and obviously for years and years and years, that was the form of entertainment. You went to the theatre if you had enough money, and then obviously with films coming in, they started being able to do these things. So it feels like a very much more so than films do nowadays, where they feel like a completely separate entity, whereas here you can see those links between theatre and stage shows and filmmaking.
I think that was where I had that's where she's come from, I think, as well.
Yeah.
She's quite an old lady, and I think she'd been in theatre stuff before and stuff. To me, though, she's so real in this that it looks like she didn't even know they were filming. That's like how good, the fact she doesn't know that they're actually all crooks. One thing I should say, I think the plot of this movie is great, isn't it? Like, it's just very simple. Like
yeah, the plot of this is the most modern thing you will find in it. This could have been made yesterday based purely on the plot, because it is a very, it just feels, it doesn't, I can imagine at the time, if I was alive in 1955 and went to see this, it would have felt like probably nothing else you'd ever seen before in terms of the plot, because it just feels very, very of today. Like, if I read a blurb about a new movie that's coming out and it said, okay, so it's about a heist and a gang of criminals holed up into a lovely old lady's house and rent a room, and they disguise themselves as a quartet, or I can't remember what
starring John Cena.
Yeah, you could.
But it sounds
maybe not John Cena, but
it does sound a bit bonkers, like one of those silly like American comedies.
Yeah.
I think the whole thing for me, for starters, I was really happy when, I think he's Herbert Lom, is that his name? The one with the hat?
Yeah, the one who's sort of the gangstery looking guy.
The scariest looking guy. When he turns up, he has a really cool entrance. And, they all turn up holding it's all pretty obvious none of them have got musical instruments in the cases. But Herbert Lom turns up just holding his one like an actual, like, what do you call it, Tommy gun. Like, he's holding it in like how you would hold a Tommy gun. And it's like a silhouette of him. And I think for me, I haven't yet, but I wanted just to see more of him. Like, I felt like he's quite scary in this. Like, did you think that? I was like, God, he actually is quite an intimidating bloke.
Yeah, he was one of the things that initially stood out, because I obviously didn't know where this film was going, and perhaps you didn't when you first watched it.
No.
I was surprised towards the latter stages of the film how dark it is. Like, this is a properly fucked up movie. Like, it's not, it comes across, and probably because of the age range, a PG or a U, depending on what copy you've got, you think it's going to be a chitty chitty bang bang, or something along those sort of lines. Yeah, you've got criminals, but the criminals you've got, they're gentlemen criminals, and they're not going to hurt anybody, but they just want to get the cash, and it's all a bit sort of slapstick, and they don't hurt anybody. But I was surprised at how much there is in there where you go, oh, they've actually killed one of their own. Oh, they've killed another one of their own. Oh, and now they're talking about killing the old lady. And okay, none of them really want to do it, but one of them will, because it's what they've got to do. And it was really, really surprising. And I think he stands out to begin with because he seems like the one who's, he's probably the most serious one of them all. But actually, in terms of the opening stages, you think, oh, he's done the properly shady stuff.
Yeah.
But then you realise, oh no, they've all done the shady stuff. They've all probably, maybe not the I can't think of his name, but the
Peter Sellers.
Peter Sellers is great in this.
He's the one that he's the kind of criminal that will just dob you in. Like he's
a grass.
Yeah,
he's 100% a grass.
There's this is so done. Obi-Wan, Alec Guinness. Alec Guinness feels like as Marcus feels like he's supposed to be the brains of it, and they sort of set him up as he's the character with all the ideas, but you wouldn't go along with any of them.
No. I mean,
he's so like over the top. Why has he got to? I mean, we should talk about the sort of fake teeth. I love him in this, actually. I think this is, this beats Obi-Wan for me in terms of Alec Guinness.
Well, I think in Star Wars, he's kind of just the Oracle almost, isn't he? Until we get Yoda. He's that character who he's kind of only really there to guide the protagonist along and just to be there as the voice of reason and the words of wisdom. And, I kind of, because I know that he after doing Star Wars, he became a little bit begrudged at how everybody wanted to talk about Star Wars. And I think he felt a little bit like, I've got all this body of work and all anybody wants to talk about is arguably my, least.
But that's why this shot me, Ryan, is because like his body of work includes this guy with false teeth. Do you know what I mean?
Which on the face of it sounds bonkers, but it works 100%.
Yeah.
From the moment we see that like shadowy figure outside the house, and then we see his, that reveal, it is so kind of, caricature, but not in a way where it becomes ham-fisted. It's a caricature in the way that characters were back then, or for comedic effect, because ultimately this is a comedy. And the teeth is just another element where you go, it makes his character a little bit more grotesque. It makes him a little bit more eerie. Much like the house is suffered from subsidence and everything's a little bit off. Everything's a little bit off. The teeth aren't quite straight and they're a bit too big for his mouth.
Yeah.
The hair's a bit wispy and doesn't really sit in the right place. The way he wears his scarf is a little bit like, it's almost a little bit.
While we're on the scarf, sorry, go on.
I was going to say the scarf is almost a little bit Fagin in Oliver Twist. That kind of, living on the streets. And he's called Professor Marcus. What he's a professor of, I don't know, because as you say, he's kind of presented as the brains of the outfit, but I think it's only because the rest of them haven't got much brains beyond them, They all have a go at one round for not having a lot of brains, but let's be honest, none of them are really in a position to be leading this venture other than Professor Marcus, and that's probably because he's the only one confident enough to do so.
I think you're right.
Yeah.
Or foolish enough to have these really harebrained schemes.
Yeah. And slightly delusional.
Yeah. Sorry, you mentioned a scarf and it just triggered that one scene. I really like it. We actually laughed at in the cinema. Me and Christina where we saw it, is when it's little things in this movie that make me laugh, and it's things I don't know if they necessarily plan. Like at one point, his scarf gets caught underneath what's her name? Damn,
Mrs. Wilberforce.
Mrs. Wilberforce. Do you remember that? He gets his scarf caught, and he's just trying to pull his scarf out from under this old lady. I was like, that's so realistic. Like, what's interesting to me is how old ladies haven't changed. Like, she was an old lady then. Like, that, you know, today in England, someone got their scarf caught under an old lady's foot and couldn't move it out the way and had to wait until she sidestepped before he like pulled it.
And the thing that is exactly the same is he doesn't say anything. And you wouldn't say anything.
No.
You wouldn't. You'd be like, you do exactly what he would done. You try and do it discreetly or just pull it and hope she doesn't notice. And that's the thing that is so British about this, is it you know, it bleeds into everything on screen, on paper, is that the politeness of these characters, even though these are criminals, there's a politeness where they don't want to offend Mrs. Wilberforce. They don't want, you know, obviously they've got some bad intentions ultimately, but they don't want to offend her. They don't want to, you know, the fact that they go and help her get the parrot from on top of they're only doing it because they don't want to say no. And, you know, it's not because they want to help her out, because they've got to go and plan their heist. They just do it because they can't say no. Because if a lovely old lady walking across the street said, "Oh, sorry, dear, can you help me with my shopping?"
They would still help.
You know, I've done it before. You go into a shop and, you know, some lovely old lady asks you, you know, where the cheese is, thinking you work there. And you take her to the cheese. That's what you do. And there's an element of, that's just a polite thing to do anyway, but there's an element of doing it because you don't want to say no, because you don't want to offend anybody. And that's here in, you know, every scene pretty much where nobody wants to offend anybody. You know, even Mrs. Wilberforce, when she goes to the police officers don't want to say to her, I mean, they take the mick out of her a little bit. But they don't want to say to her, "Look, Mrs. Wilberforce, you keep reporting these things to us and we're getting a little bit tired of it." You don't want to say that because it's lovely Mrs. Wilberforce, you know. And that's, you know, the parallel between the criminals and the police, both acting in the same way because they don't want to offend somebody, is something that is so British that I wonder if that's where the 2004 version, where they obviously made it, you know, I think they put it in the, you know, the southern states of America and they changed it for that. I wonder if that's why that doesn't work. I've not seen it and I probably won't see it because that looks awful.
Just from the trailer, you can just see that it doesn't work, don't you, of that one? Because it's, and it just shows that even if you can have a great story like this, just quite a simple plot, a little crime caper comedy, and you can do it and get Tom Hanks and some other sort of successful people in it and it just not work. And I don't know if that's because, you know, this works best setting London with a British old lady. I don't quite understand why this couldn't work in another way. And then, you know, the Coen brothers, you know, generally they have a lot of hits, not just misses. You know what I mean? I don't know why. And maybe at one point I have to watch that, but I can't imagine we're ever going to want to talk about that one. I feel like this is, you know, if we'd watched the trailer and we'd been like, "Oh, that's sort of worth watching," but it just doesn't, like, compared to this. Or it just looked a bit sort of cringe, didn't it?
Yeah, it looks like it kind of missed. Well, maybe they were trying to do something different with it, but it looks like it kind of missed the point because, you know, this is very much a film that at the center of it is this heist. And, you know, these criminals holding up in this lovely old lady's home. But actually, it's more about Britishness. You know, that is the biggest thing. And it's almost like if you take out, you know, the themes of the film, then all you've got is the plot and narrative. And beyond that, you haven't really got much else. And obviously, if they've tried to adapt it and make it appealing for an American audience, they may get those references and those, you know, those cultural things that we necessarily wouldn't, and vice versa. May have an American watching this and not necessarily understand, you know, why bits are quite as funny as they are because they don't, you know, they can't identify with it.
Didn't they have good cars back then though, Ryan? It's a real like time capsule, like, for me watching this. And also it just looked like, you know, even like, you know, crime back then, you could be 4 or 5 gangsters sitting in a car, you know, potentially, and go rob a bank, or, you know, not this and not robbing a bank, but, you know, it's closer to like cowboy movies in terms of like the stuff you'd Nowadays with like phones and stuff, like crime back then, it was, you could be so much more faceless, and like, you like the sort of crime they're trying to do now, you wouldn't really be able to get away with
I think immediately the differences that you would have is, and I realise as you've mentioned this about the cars, brings me on to potentially why I really usually dislike these types of films, which I'll get onto in a minute. But it is a heist, but not as we probably would know like you say a heist today. A lot of people would think of things like GTA for a start, or like a lot of high speed car chases and elaborate action sequences and things like that. And obviously you weren't going to get that in 1955, so it has to be a little bit more clever. So when he moves the van to block off the road so that the only cars down the end of the road are the van with the money and the two cars that they're in, it's a little bit more thoughtful and actually a little bit more, obviously much more kind of risky, because there isn't a quick getaway. Mm-hmm. The getaway is, well, I can only go as fast as this car will go, and these cars aren't really meant to go fast. At no point do these cars ever really look like they go over 20 miles an hour, so the getaway element of it immediately feels a little bit more tense.
Yeah.
Because you're like, well, hang on a minute. That copper, when he starts running after the car,
could catch up.
I'm going, he's going to get there.
Yeah,
it does. And obviously, you wouldn't have that, unless you've got Tom Cruise running after a car, and even then, there's
Terminator 2 runs after
exactly.
The car pretty good,
exactly. So it is a heist, but in just a completely different way. But you mentioning the cars, hit upon some memories of Sunday afternoons, and the reason why I don't really watch these types of films is because this is my dad's era of film, really. So he would watch these 50s, 60s, 70s films, and he wouldn't just sit down and watch the film. He'd sit down and he'd watch the film, and as soon as a car came on, he'd click the pause button when it was on, when you could pause Sky Plus and things like that. Or before that, he'd just talk over it. And he'd say, see, that is a 1954 Daimler Cruiser, that is. Oh, yeah. So that was probably like your Ford Focus of the day. And he'd tell you all about the cars, and he's a mechanic by trade, so it makes total sense, and it's his passion more than anything. And it's become a massively running joke where if you watch anything that is made today but set in the 60s, 70s, 50s, or whatever it may be, particularly the 40s during World War II, he'll pause it and tell you what's wrong with the car. And he'll say, really? This is set in 1943, and that is actually the front grille from the 1945 version.
Wow,
and of course,
deep knowledge.
And it is deep knowledge, and we all have that thing that we can do that with. Mine's probably wrestling, yours is probably music in some, facets and things like that. But it is that thing of when you're a kid, and Sundays for me were like and kind of non-official family day, whereby the things we would do on a Sunday would usually be we'd go up to MFI and look at kitchens whilst my mum and dad were thinking about getting a new kitchen. We'd come home, mum would cook the roast, and my dad would put an old war film on. And this was in the days where, you had a PlayStation, but you didn't get a new game every week. So you might have been bored with the games you've got and whatnot. So for me, this was Sunday afternoons. And this is a Sunday afternoon film, but I'm watching it with new eyes now. It's not a Sunday afternoon film in the sense of, God, is there nothing else on the telly? You know? So I think that is my own prejudice and biases, admittedly. But that's why these sorts of films are usually not really the kinds of things that I'd watch. And interestingly, I said to my dad the other day, I said, oh yeah, we're doing a Ladykillers on the podcast. And immediately he went, oh yeah, that's a good one. That is Alec Guinness, isn't it? Straight away. And I'm going, yeah. And I know exactly how he'd watch that film. He'd go, see that van there? Yeah, see that? He wouldn't have been able to do that because that van didn't have a handbrake like that.
Yeah, fair.
All things like that. And he'd pick out all these things, and you'd an hour long, an hour and a half film would take 2 hours to watch because you'd pause it and and he'd tell you everything about the cars, So yeah, that's where I came from with it. But I now see why he enjoys watching films like this and of this time, because the cars are so different. They're 10 times, I don't even know what I'm saying 10 times, but they're so different from today's cars that there is a sort of level of intrigue in them, and they all look pristine, and they all look, like they've been well kept, because at the time they cost a lot of money, and if you had a car, you looked after it. Nowadays you can pick up an old banger for a couple of £100, run it to the ground and get rid of it.
Yeah, that's true. I mean,
bit of a tangent there about my personal life with my dad and his cars, but there you go.
I feel like I know what you mean. For me, if this was on if this was on the Sunday afternoon, I wouldn't probably watched it either. And so what often turns my head on these films is actually seeing them in more of a cinema environment, when you're sort of forced to sit down and actually pay attention to them.
You've paid the money, so you want to,
Well, it's just seeing them in a slightly louder. I mean, where we saw them with this place in Bognor, it was on just a normal DVD player and on a big screen. But I was a bit worried because the DVD menu screen when we went in there was in German, and then when you press play, they were speaking German, and then Christina had to intervene, and then he bless him, he put the subtitles on English, but they were still speaking in German. So Christina had to help change. She was the only person in there that could work out the DVD menu.
Well, as you say, the average age of the clientele in there were significantly older,
and. But yeah, I mean, that to me is like, being in a room full of people like laughing at this, because it actually made me laugh. Like some films you can sit through, modern comedies now, and I don't know, they don't quite hit the same. Like the jokes in this are actually funny. I think all the jokes generally land in it. There's like they're high stakes at the end, and there's a real like deep sense of. For me, it was the lady. She is just, you really do feel for her at some point. It's like she's constantly offering them tea, and they're like, oh, God, they're having to stop the record again, and stop talking about their crime planning to go and. And they're
to go and have a cup of tea. Yeah.
As the movie goes on, they're like, no more tea, and it's like you feel really bad for her because it's like all those characters are like caricatures of crooks, aren't they? Like, like the brainy one, the muscle, and they are a bit charactery, but it works when they're, how they're treating her. They are kind of taking advantage of her, and I think you feel that, and I think the film actually does want you to feel it. Like, it doesn't feel like, oh, I'm actually feeling a bit bad about Miss. God, what's her name? I feel bad. I can't remember her name.
So it's Louisa Wilberforce.
Wilberforce, yeah. I don't know why I keep thinking it's not Wil. And but she's so. But then at the same time, she's annoying. Like, she's annoying. She caused that whole drama with the. There's a guy from a Carry On movie here. It's a bit of a
Frankie Howard. Yeah.
Yeah, she causes stop treating that horse so badly, and then she just causes a massive drama. And then I don't know if they're like, oh, it's this lady, it's her fault. And the police are like, oh, don't be silly. She wouldn't cause all this chaos, but she does. And even after the robbery, when they actually do it, she forgets her bloody umbrella again. And the other bit when she's like very relatable is when, she thinks there's this little quartet staying with her, or I don't know how many of them are there.
So we have Professor Marcus, we've got Harry Robinson, Lewis Harvey, Major Claude Courtney, and One Round Lawson. So
what's the 5 version of a quartet? I don't know.
I said it. I said a quartet earlier, and I knew there wasn't 4 of them. There's 5.
When she sort of, they're all about to leave, and then is it when they're about to leave? But there's the scene where she invites all her friends around. And then, because she sort of secretly, she wants them to all play her, you can without telling you, this film you sort of know her intention is for them to all perform their lovely like classical music in front of all her friends, and she's done it in an underhand way, even like, you know, she's done it without telling them, which is what they're doing to her, and it feels like it's not that she's as bad as them, but it's little moments like that where you sort of feel bad for her, but then it's like, well, she's just a sneaky in a way.
Yeah. There is that element where you do get those people, and we've probably all had it with like our older relatives in our families. And no, you know, usually there's no ill will or anything like that or untoward, but you know, even just constantly asking if you want a cup of tea is annoying. Like, and there's nothing wrong, you know, they're being nice, but sometimes it's that Britishness, isn't it? Of, you know, you can't really say anything because all they're doing is offering you a cup of tea, but you really want to say, stop asking me for a cup of tea.
I've never turned down a tea, but for me, it's more like when you go around someone's house and they've sort of secretly done you a dinner. And you didn't necessarily...
Yeah, and you go, oh, sorry, no, I can't stay. I've got to get home. Oh, well, go on, just have a little bit. And then you end up staying the whole evening.
Yeah, that's what she's like.
I sort of had with my mum, like and my nan on my mum's side, very much the sort of people who would, you know, like if you went round theirs for dinner, it would be a case of they load your plate up and they'd say... And they would say these words, only eat what you can. And I would say often to my mum, I say, look, don't put it on my plate because I ain't going to eat it. And she'd say, oh, all right, I won't put it on your plate. And then she'd go and put it on your plate. And she'd go, oh, you don't have to eat it. And I went, it was fucking on my plate now, though. You know, and it's that thing of going, what has she actually done wrong there? I hadn't done anything wrong, but for some reason it annoys you.
Yeah.
And I think that is the epitome of Mrs. Wilberforce. She's not doing anything wrong, but for some reason it's just annoying.
She is great,
you know.
But yet they... what do you think about her parrots? Because they're all named after like army officers or something, and she says at one point, I think that
they're named after her late husbands, aren't they?
But her husband died. Her husband died in the Navy, I think, but he made sure the parrots were okay, I think.
Yeah.
And I mean, what about, you know, this is set in a time, I guess, just after the war, and do you think that has any?
I think it does have quite a lot of bearing. I mean, obviously, the major Claude Courtney is a major, and he would have been a major in the either in the Navy or in the Army, and he would have been most probably, you know, in the war. And I think most of these people would have been in the war. And whilst it's probably difficult for us to say from our age group how this would have affected them in terms of what difference does that make to the characters that we're seeing in this film? But it would have done, because it's such a significant period of, of history that it would have done. You know, the fact that I think for us now, if we knew somebody and they referred to themselves as major,
yeah, I mean,
we would probably think, all right, he's a bit up himself, isn't he? You know, all right, he's the major. We'd probably take the piss a bit. I mean, not in any way, not in a horrible way, but you probably would just think, that's a bit weird, it's a bit odd. But in those days, probably a lot of people would have been that. You'd have had Petey Major, all right, Captain, Sarge, it probably would have been a load of things, and people would have been, known by their rank in the army or in the Navy or whatever, whatever force they were a part of. And I can't really see the professor, Alec Guinness, can't really see him in the war. He's the one character I couldn't really see in the war. Like, if he was, he would probably have been that person who was always injured, in inverted commas.
Or do you think he would have been an officer and just sat at the back somewhere?
Well, as we know, officers will not work. That's quite a big thing from the Bridge on the River Kwai. That's one of the main things. That's one of the main themes on there. He plays Alec.
Really?
I was about to say he plays Alec Guinness. So Alec Guinness plays an officer in there, and one of the big themes in Bridge on the River Kwai is that, for anyone who doesn't know the story of that, obviously a true story, they were forced to build a bridge over the River Kwai, and Alec Guinness's character was a officer as opposed to a private, and the big kind of character trait there was that officers will not work. So you've got all of these, privates and lower ranking members who are doing all the work, and the officers are just telling them what to do. So
I think the fact that they're crooks and some of them, one of them clearly was in the military, is like this, generation of people that some of them didn't necessarily come out of war, and that they'd be able to. You could say maybe he wasn't able to find something, an honest trade to do, maybe or maybe these just are a bunch of swindlers. But I mean, you can tell that. What do you think when they use the excuse? They say, we've all got one of you, like, a mum or a nan like you at home, that we're all going out, when they're trying to, so the cello or double, I think it's cello case, the big dude gets busted open, all the cash is revealed to Miss Wilberforce. And then, there's some explaining to do at that point. And but they sort of,
and that, that look
yeah,
that One Round gives, who is played by Danny Green, is just incredibly funny. I think, for a big guy like him, he is incredibly well attuned to knowing what makes him as an actor funny.
Yeah.
Seeing him in such a, because you see that guy, if you saw him walking down the street, you think, Christ,
it's like a James Bond henchman villain.
Yeah, you could
like
see
a Jaws type character.
Yeah, you could see that quite easily, and that look up to Mrs. Wilberforce is like, oh, I've caught. It's like when you go down and try and nick a biscuit when you're not allowed, and your mum catches you. It's like that kind of look, But even that scene, not to keep bringing it back to the same thing, that happens because One Round doesn't want to ring the doorbell and say, "Sorry, Mrs. Wilberforce, just caught the cello case in the door there."
Yeah.
Because they don't want to do it. They just want to get away, and they don't want to, they don't want to bother Mrs. Wilberforce any more than they have to. I think if that was, let's say take the remake version, if that is in America, I don't think that would be as believable. It's very believable for that to happen in this country, even now. It's not something where I'm looking at it going, "Oh, that's ridiculous."
Yeah, you're right. Even the way I react to that scene, like, it's coming, like that case is going to open, but you also don't question that he would, like, you don't go plot hole. He would just knocked on the door.
Yeah, one, you just knock on the door, you'd be like, well,
we all know.
Yeah,
he wouldn't. Of course he's not knocking.
Of course he's not going to.
I'd try and yank it. It's the same joke as the scarf.
Yeah,
like he's just trying to get it out from under her and like weave around her to get it out.
And there's something so unexplainable about that Britishness, because the most logical thing to do is like, "Oh, sorry, you've just sat on my scarf," but you feel awkward doing that. Or I've certainly felt awkward in the past doing something like that. Even to the fact of, there's one time at uni where one of the lecturers kept calling me by the wrong name, and I didn't want to correct him.
Oh God!
And it's like, but that's something that is quite, I was like, oh, I don't want to be awkward. It's not being awkward. It's your name, But for some reason, you don't want to say anything.
I think that when she invites, after that bit, when the cello busts open, all the cash comes out, I think it starts to get really good, actually. Like some films have a bit of a lull, don't they? Like just a natural lull. Like I watched last night. I watched Almost Famous. Have you ever seen that? It's quite good. Kate Hudson.
I don't think I have seen that.
It's good, right? But that movie, to be fair, is like 2 hours, and it's like a sort of biographical bit, so it's like 2 hours and 20 or 40 minutes. It's well long, so it's not really worth comparing to an hour and 20 minutes movie. But I like that this is short, and it doesn't really ever, you know, like you worry in old movies that you can be sitting there getting a bit bored. It's just you think I don't want to put that on because I might
which
be
is
bored.
exactly what I thought was going to happen, because I thought, oh, it's going to be one of these like it's going to be like a 3-hour film, isn't it? But it's an hour and a half, and it is a pacey hour and a half.
Yeah.
And that's the one thing, like what you've just said, and just to pick up, that's the one thing that can kill a movie is the pacing. Like not knowing when, you know, the beats of a movie and when to do what, and that is sometimes, like, I've watched films that are actually really good films, but the only thing that makes it difficult to watch is the pacing of it. It's like sometimes it feels too fast, sometimes it feels too slow. And here, I'm not going to say it's perfectly paced, but it's pretty damn close to it.
Yeah, I would say that it's got replay value because of its length and because of I didn't really, you know, it's the high that, you know, it's the silliness of it's, you know, all builds up to the heist. Then she finds the money. It starts clicking in her head, I think, and they're all thinking, God, is she working this out? And then, you know, they're thinking about kidnapping her. And then as they're planning to sort of snatch her, I think they say, all her friends that's when she's invited all her friends around, because what she was trying to do was get them to all play one recital before they go, I think. And at one point it's like an Only Fools and Horses joke. It's like they're like you know, it's like, what, we're going to kidnap all of them. I don't know. He goes, and he's like, how are we going to take her? It's like, we're going to charter a bus. You know what I mean? It's a very much like a Del Boy. We're going to charter a bus, Rodney. You know what I mean? Like, it's very like, you know, it's London-y. I guess it just feels, you know, we're not far from London and we don't know what London was like that time, and we don't even know what London's like now, really, even just being like an hour and a half away from it on the train. Like, God knows. But you know, I've got family from around from that time. My great uncle Joey had a really old, you know, he was a market trader, and he lived in sort of Croydon. And, you know, there's a real, and you know, that side of my family all came from London to Littlehampton, and they all had this sort of sense of humour. We're going to charter a bus, you know what I mean?
One-liners.
It's all very much there, and the older ladies from it were like her in this movie, and it's like, you know, super polite, or, you know, I know I'm just saying it's relatable, but it really has. I think why it's got an authentic. It is just real. She's like a real character.
Yeah, and I think if she was a caricature, like they are kind of caricatures, I think it would have been a bit too much.
I don't think it would have worked.
It wouldn't have worked. I think she's the anchor. She's the one that keeps it a bit grounded, because they all look like they've been designed as characters. We've got the big, heavy, lumpy fella who's a bit dim. We've got the slightly grotesque, somewhat charming, but also very snidely, smarmy kind of, you know, in the professor. We've got the, you know, the stiff upper lip, you know, very well dressed major. We've got the, you know, the slightly dark gangster guy, and then we've got the Jack the Lad.
Is that what he is? Because he's the one that I don't really. He's the one to me that I can't. I can't really stereotype him as easily.
Yeah, he's the Del Boy. You know,
okay,
he's the teddy boy that, you know, if you look at the hair, it's not too far away from
the
Del Boy,
guy.
you know, which is what Del Boy would have, you know. I mean, that whole scene when they've got the friends over, there's so many funny bits. So, like, when you were just talking, we've obviously got it on in the background, and I'm trying not to laugh and kind of have it come out on the microphone, because it's the bit where the smallest, oldest lady of her friends, the one who looks the most frail, is fighting with Danny Green, who plays One Round, the big guy, over the cello case. And obviously they all know, other than the three older ladies, they all know that it's full of money and it hasn't got a cello in there at all. And she's pulling it off of him, and he's struggling to keep it off of her. And that image is quite funny.
Yeah.
But then the way she's kind of doddering about, you know, and again, it all goes back to, sorry, we can't do a performance. We've got to go and rehearse at some, it's all you need to say, but nobody wants to say it. And they, you know, then it goes into the room and, you know, Alec Guinness looks like he's being forced at gunpoint to play this piano, and he's like,
it's playing itself though.
You
Isn't
know,
it? Do you remember it? It's like
it's one of those.
Yeah,
I don't know what you call those ones actually, but he's making it like he's playing it, and it's just, as I say, visually very funny, and also contextually very funny as well. But
when they leave as well, I think she says, "Oh, I thought they'd never leave."
Yeah,
it's like, you invited them, I'd imagine.
You know, it's that thing. It's like probably after we finish recording this, I'll go, "Oh God, glad he's gone." But like when I come over yours, like, "Oh, glad he's gone." That's a very British thing to do. Let's do a nice evening. You know, spend it with your friends, having a laugh. But you will always say, "Oh, I thought they'd never leave," or you know, it's something that happens so often. You know, in this country.
So I like the bit where he convinces them. He's sort of saying it's like adding. He sort of goes through this long way of explaining that, you know, if you think about Miss Wilberforce, that you only add one farthing onto everyone's insurance policies. I don't quite remember how he gets there. Is it because the money's from an insurance debt? I don't.
Yeah. So I think basically what he ends up saying, which is, you know, you've mentioned Del Boy a couple of times, is quite closely linked to something in that, which I'll go through. But he basically says that, you know, the insurance will have to pay the bank, and the way the insurance company will gain that money back is they will put up a farthing on each new policy that's taken out. So we're not really stealing a lot of money. We're stealing a farthing from, and it's only a farthing, and it's got this weird kind of logic to it where you kind of go, I suppose it does actually make a bit of sense. And there's a scene in Only Fools and Horses where he, you know, he's basically saying, I think he goes into the second-hand car trade, you know, and he says, well, that's the thing, second-hand car trade, it's going to take off, in it, because the government at the moment, they're not going to want to pay the import prices on foreign cars. So that means that you won't be able to buy a new car for love nor money. But what that will mean is that the second-hand car market will go through the roof. So that's where we can make a bit of bunch, Rodney, you know. And it's actually somewhat logical, but from a total idealist kind of point of view. And as soon as you start to look at it and pick a few holes out of it, you go, oh yeah, that's totally ludicrous. It's not what's going to happen at all. They're still stealing £60,000, which I would imagine at that point would have been closer to $1 million, you know, in kind of today's money, you know. But it's I don't get that they're trying to convince Mrs. Wilberforce that that's why they're doing it. They're trying to convince themselves that's what they're doing. I think it's them kind of basically that's how they justify it, you know. Don't think about it for too long. And it's, you know, towards the end where they start killing each other off, they justify it because, oh, well, he was going to kill me. You know, Alec Guinness is the, you know, the least trustworthy of the lot. He goes and has a chat with one of them outside the room and says I wouldn't trust him, and then he goes back into the room and says to the other two, I wouldn't trust him. You know,
it's I know it's on right in the background, but the other great scene when the policeman comes to the door and they're all telling her what to say and what not to say, and they sort of tell her, just don't let him come in. Say you haven't got a warrant, you need a warrant to come in, and she just pretty much opens the door and says, you can't come in, you haven't got a warrant. And the policeman's like, see, at this point, me and Christina thought different things. I thought that he. At the end of the movie, that police officer does know that she had something to do with it, because this is the tell. Like, he thinks something's not right there, and I thought at the end of the movie, that police officer allows her to just get away with it scot-free. Christina thinks that no one ever believed her, and they thought that the police officer at this point probably just thought she was a bit losing her marbles. But I thought he was picking up on something here. What do you think about that?
I think it's a bit of both. So I think he picks up on something that's not quite right. She's not acting herself. But I think by the end of it, it's almost a thing of like, I know she wasn't acting herself, but now she's convinced that she's part of this robbery. All right, Mrs. Wilberforce. It's almost a thing of like, you know, where it's probably more, you're a bit tired. You've had your friends over for a lovely evening and you need to get to bed, and all you want to do is get to bed, and you don't want to say, "I'm very sorry, officer." But, I think she's the only person who doesn't really mind saying what she thinks, other than to her friends. She's the one who doesn't mind going to the officer and, telling him about what's been going on. She doesn't mind telling off Frankie Howard and his market stall for treating the horse badly. But everybody, it's almost like she's the, a bit of a force to be reckoned with.
She is.
Yeah, and nobody really wants to be horrible to Mrs. Wilberforce because they don't want to get on her bad side, they don't want, at the very least, the annoyance of her more than anything.
I mean, these are all, none of them would kill her, I think. It's clearly revealed that, like, they do have a boundary.
Yeah.
They have something, wherever they see their nan or their mum, and how I'm not sure, but, and Short Round's is that his name? One Round.
Short Round is the character from the Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom.
One Round is, he's quite explicit, and he's like, I'm not. He's not even shy about saying it, is he? He sort of really,
I'm not killing Mrs. Wilberforce.
Yeah, he's really taken by her. I think he would actually. I feel like in another life he would live there as an actual lodger and look after her parents.
Yeah, well, I think it probably goes back to that East End, not necessarily gangster. Well, I suppose to a certain extent, like you hear stories about the Cray twins, and how much they were scary people on the streets of London, but they treated their mother well, and they treated the elders well, and if they had it's almost like a, what do they call it, honor amongst thieves, that kind of thing, where they go and hurt other nasty people and people who don't pay them, but they're not going to go and hurt Mrs. Wilberforce. They're not going to go and hurt Mrs. Wilberforce because she's done nothing wrong, and I think that's probably a little bit why nobody wants to do it, because they realise that she hasn't done anything wrong. We're shady people, but I'm not that shady.
It's dawned on me though that they won't do it themselves, but they're happy to let. Well, most of them, not One Round. He doesn't want. I think
he doesn't want any part of it, does he?
Yeah, he doesn't. But
everybody. Well,
they're kind of happy for someone else to do it. Like they're drawing straws for it, and then it's like. Sorry, there was just a bit earlier when you were saying that, Ryan, of like when she looks up sort of sadly. I don't know what she says, but she looks up to like her to her husband's picture on the wall, who obviously died in the war or something. And she looks up sort of a bit sad and like going, "Oh, what would he say in all this?" or something. And then it like she's like looking up all teary eyed and looking at this like patriotic picture. And then right behind her is like Alec Guinness like rolling his eyes.
Yeah.
It's like, that is great. Like, it is great.
Yeah.
So many good moments.
You can almost hear him saying, "Oh God, she's going to spin us one of her yarns in a minute." Here we go.
And then it, I didn't know it was going in this direction of. Then it's just like, it's pretty much like a sort of a Final Girl horror movie, and it's just one by one they're falling off the roof.
That's the thing. Like when it got to this part on my first viewing, I was like, right, how are they going to get out of this then? What kind of slapsticky thing is going to happen to prevent somebody from dying? Somebody goes to kill somebody. It doesn't quite happen, but it does. And I was like, oh, okay. That's quite surprising. And that's where I go, oh, this is actually a really dark movie. It's, obviously, and looking back, it's referred to as a black comedy, and it, that makes a lot more sense. But going into it, I didn't quite realise that. But even the way that happens, there's still humour in it. So when they've got to get rid of the Major's body, who is the only one up to that point who is an accidental death.
Yeah,
because he falls off the top of the house, doesn't he?
He is running away with all the money.
He's running away, but I don't think at that point they're going to kill him.
No,
I think it's just okay. Get him. We need the money, but he ends up falling off the house, and obviously they drop him onto the passing train, which is quite funny in itself because you've got that image of both of them holding onto a leg and then waiting at the right moment and then dropping the body. And then it's almost like it's not quite done in this way, but if this was, let's say, a shorter film or, you know, a comedy series, it would have that quick cut where somebody would die and then they're dropped onto a train again. And it felt very much like that. It was like, oh, they're going to do it again.
Yeah.
Like that, like, oh, they've found a way to get rid of the bodies and that's the only way they can get rid of the body.
Yeah.
You know, it was quite a funny thing of like, oh, that's actually quite funny that they're doing that again. And this time it's you know, the others doing it rather than.
But I guess, you know, like when he arrives at the house and he scopes it out a bit, when you know, it's Alec Guinness, he looks out the window and it's got the station. I'm so sorry, I forgot. I don't know if it's not Houston. I will find out, but the station is one of the main London ones.
Yeah, I don't know. I wouldn't have a clue.
I'll find out. But he looks out and he's like, how exhilarating or something. And it's almost like the smoking gun of like, yeah that's the end, the train, that's what kills, that's what does you all in.
And that, you know, on a second viewing, that's when you pick up and you go, oh, he obviously had that kind of plan from the start.
Oh, I didn't realise that.
Well, I think that's why how exhilarating. It's like he's going, oh, brilliant, we've got a good place to, you know.
I just, you know, if we didn't have to talk about this and you didn't have to watch it for this, I think that character does stick with me, like that, specifically that exhilarate. You know what I mean? What do you think? Like Alec Guinness, just, you know.
Well, I
know he said about it before, but like it actually is great, isn't it? Like it's like, I'm so glad I've seen it. Basically, that's how I felt.
I would really have loved to seen Alec Guinness do it on stage.
Yeah,
like it's that, and that's what I meant earlier when it's like you see those links. This feels mainly because it obviously they have the other locations that they go to, but generally speaking, the vast majority of the film is set in the house. So you could it is a very, you know, closed off location script, so it's quite easy to convert that onto a stage show. And sometimes you get those performances where you're like, I'd love to see somebody do that live in front of me. Like, yeah. And sometimes it's always the difficult thing with film to try and recapture, and that's the biggest difference between theatre and film. Is when you're in a theatre and you're watching something and it's you and the audience and the people on stage, there is that palpable energy in a room that you can't put your finger on, you can't explain until you're in that room and you're experiencing it. And it's very, very difficult to recreate that in film. If you can at all, arguably, you create different feelings when you watch film, I think. And it's one of those things where I wish I'd have seen Alec Guinness do it on stage, because I would have come out going, that is so great. And
did he do it on stage?
No, I don't think he did. But it's one of those things where you go, yeah. I wish he did do it on stage.
It's King's Cross, by the way, in the background. And there's little YouTube videos on this you can find where it's like one of those. I really like movie locations. Like, I feel like when we talk about, if we do, you know, Clint Eastwood movies, so I went to some of the locations in Spain where they shot a lot of those and stuff. But, you know, this is one of those ones that if you're being real nerdy about it, you could go stand exactly where certain bits were shot or whatever. And I know the fact that it's sort of set by that, you know, sort of a famous London station, maybe just because it's close to us, it's just that it's a cool thing. But in terms of as a stage show, I mean, the bit that would, you know, the dropping, you know, not that I'm a genius and know how to work those things, but, you know, like in Jesus Christ Superstar, when Judas is hung and they drop the mic.
Yeah.
You could imagine something, God knows, how they did dropping each criminal in front of the train, you know, and all the smoke comes up. Like, you're right, it's very stage show friendly, isn't it?
Yeah. There's you know, there's a reason why it was made into a stage show and into a play, because it is so easy to convert it, and there isn't a lot of jiggery pokery to try and get it. Strangely, we ended up going to watch Doctor Strangelove, not actually live at the theatre, but it was one of these National Theatre live productions at our local cinema. And that's one where, because obviously there's a bit of a link here because Peter Sellers plays Doctor Strangelove and plays a host of characters in the film. So there's that thing where you've got to go, well, how is Steve Coogan going to play 4 or 5 different characters in the play? How's he going to be able to do that? And, that's part of the challenge of doing that on stage. Whereas here, you haven't really got any of that. It's a very... You could probably just take the script and just do it word for word on stage, and it would be thereabouts what ended up happening on stage, So,
and I think as well, I love movies where you kind of get to know what the interior of a whole building is like. It's one of my things I like. Like you feel like you could go. I think it's succeeded when you can knock on that house and pretty much find your way around. Oh, it's this room. Oh, it's this room.
Yeah.
And I think this movie does that way, even like the back garden, even like the roofs. It's like, I know it's kind of easy maybe because it's just set in one building, but there are certain movies where, it feels like, it does really feel like an actual location. And that's to its credit because it has a lot of those scenes where it has like fake backgrounds of like, which is like, to me, it does feel a bit like those old. It does feel a bit like Oliver Twist looks a bit like that, I think, like with and also Mary Poppins. But to me, that those scenes with the fake backgrounds really add to the sort of mystical, sort of almost what elevates these movies in a way because they make you feel a little bit. It feels a bit more fantastical. It sort of means that these sort of uber characters like Alec Guinness in this, Marcus. Is it Professor?
Professor. Let me scroll up. Oh God. Yeah, Professor Marcus. Sorry.
It feels like they belong in the world a bit more because it's got these like fantastical elements that look like. I know you said about the budget as well. It's hard to find these facts on these older movies. But I mean, it couldn't have cost that much, could it? I don't know. Like, it feels like all.
No, I mean, it's very difficult because in today's age, comparing what we know films are made on today to what they were made on, that in 1955 it's night and day, and I think a lot of these were made with more of a budget-friendly kind of approach. So there's a reason why a lot of it is in a set and why you get those location shots, because location shots are more expensive to film. And it's one of those things where on these older films and these older sitcoms from, anything from the 50s, well, probably anything from the 30s right up until I'd say the 80s or 90s, you get this look where if they're in an interior shot, i.e. in someone's home or in a building, it looks very crisp and very nice. But when you go to an exterior shot, it looks a little bit grainy and a little bit, those BBC sitcoms, Only Fools and Horses, One Foot in the Grave, those types of things, is because they used different cameras and they used sets as opposed to locations, and it has that kind of look here, not quite to the same extent. You can see ever so slightly the differences, but it brings that kind of charm to it. So those places do feel different. When they are outside the home, it does feel a little bit different to when they're inside the home, and when they're committing the heist, it does feel like you've gone on a bit of a journey because you're seeing London, as it was.
Yeah, versus like a set.
Yeah, which you can see is a bit of a set because it
kind of, the lighting is quite like a set.
I think that's probably because obviously they're trying to create natural lighting, and it never quite manages to do that. You probably can do it now a lot better, but in those days, it's the shine you get off of the characters.
Yeah,
because it's not natural lighting and those kinds of things where you can just about tell. But probably we should go through the crew, because we've spoken a fair bit about the film. So it was directed by Alexander Mackendrick, who'd worked on things like Whiskey Galore, Man in the White Suit, Sweet Smell of Success. Screenwriter was William Rose, worked on Genevieve, It's a Mad, Mad, Mad World, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. Cinematographer is Otto Heller. Richard III is probably his biggest work, and things like The Ipcris File. Also a film called Peeping Tom, which was made in the 60s, which is a really quite a revolutionary film. For those who don't know, if it's the film, I think it's called Peeping Tom. It's about a peeping Tom, but it was made in 1960, and the entire film is made from the perspective of the peeping Tom. So I don't think you ever see him. You just see his vision, which obviously he's a peeping Tom, so it's a bit, it's a bit crude anyway. But from a filmmaking perspective in 1960, that was unheard of. Obviously now we see it, things like Peep Show, and lots and lots of things have done similar things since then, but at the time it was quite a controversial film for that reason. Composer was Tristram Carey, editor was Jack Harris, costume designer was Anthony Mendelsohn, art director Jim Morahan, and production designer was Jim Morahan. Art director and production designer was Jim Morahan. The cast, I think we've pretty much mentioned everyone, but let's just go through it again. We've got, obviously, Alec Guinness, Obi-Wan himself, playing Professor Marcus. Obviously, most notable work is Star Wars. Can't really get away from that. We've got Katie Johnson, who plays Mrs. Wilberforce. And interestingly with Katie Johnson, so she was in her late 70s, I believe, when this was made. And so the director wanted her name to be on the billboard and on the billing of it, because they thought this could be her last film. And I think she only made 2 after this, but she died a couple of years later. So it was a way of kind of, I don't know if she had been top billing, but it was a way of getting her to, it might be her last film, let's give her top billing, so it's quite a nice gesture. We have Peter Sellers playing Harry Robinson. Other than this, obviously you've got Dr. Strangelove, but probably most well known for the Pink Panther series as Inspector Clouseau. We've got Herbert Lom as Lewis Harvey, who was in the 62 version of Phantom of the Opera. He was in the 60s version of Spartacus as well.
Was he the Phantom?
I believe he was the Phantom. I will double check that in a second.
Is he in actual Spartacus, the Kirk Douglas?
Yes. So he's in there.
God, I think I may have just clocked why.
But I think he was a very well-known actor at the time.
So I heard when I saw it, all these older ladies were like, "Oh,
Herbert Lom, yeah." I mean, that is a soundtrack to any, but when grandparents or older members of your family, whenever there's an old film on, you hear that about so many names. That Kirk Douglas, and whatever it may be.
Just in general, like Herbert Lom in this, like
I think he usually played the bad guy in a lot of things.
Immediately, and it's it's that thing often works, doesn't it? When you get someone who's very serious bad guy, that's what they said. He was often a bad guy to be in a kind of comedy caper, and it's like that works in worked for Home Alone. Didn't it, with
Joe Pesci?
Yeah, and it's like that often works. But for me in this, like the moment he turns up, that he's going to be whatever's going to happen. He's going to be there at the end, against whoever's left. And then he just had that energy that was like oozes cool in this. How did you feel that?
Yeah, I felt very, very quickly. Okay, he's going to be the baddest of them all in that. Yeah. He felt like that he was going to be that. I don't think obviously it ever really gets to the point where he is the baddest of them all necessarily, but that's the role he's kind of playing. I feel like the reason they cast him is because that's what they wanted. It's a little bit like if you at the moment, if you want a good looking hard man, you're probably going to cast somebody like Tom Hardy, that kind of thing. We've got Cecil Parker as Major Claude Courtney, and we have Danny Green as One Round Lawson, Jack Warner as the superintendent, and obviously Frankie Howard, that we mentioned earlier, as the Barrow Boy.
And Carry On movie, dude.
Yeah, Carry On. And
So-
also the taxi driver. I can't remember the taxi driver's name, but he's been in a lot of Carry On movies as well.
So Carry On movies, I've been in and out of, like, and a couple of years ago I watched a few as well, and I like them. But to me, this movie has enough of that, but also has that sort of gritty realness to it that, to me, it makes this more appealing than those films.
Yeah, I mean, when I was talking earlier about those kinds of films, Carry On films is essentially what I was getting at.
Okay.
You know, those are the films where I go, oh God, it's a bloody Carry On film. You know, my dad loves them, and you know, it's that kind of thing where everything's a bit sort of like, oh matron, you know, that it's not really that funny other than in a kind of way, and it's you know, it's just a bit, I suppose, what's the word I'm looking for?
Maybe tired.
A bit tired, a bit cringe, a bit, you know, it's trying to be saucy, but it's just a bit, you know.
I've come round to them a bit, because I used to feel like, because very much the same, like I saw a lot of them growing up, but I don't know, the hospital one, I found that quite funny. I think they're more, what I see about the Carry On movies is like listening to certain types of music, like which, you know, like this is a song, you know, this movie is like, it's like a Neil Young song or something, or maybe not a Neil Young song, but it's like don't know what I'm trying to say. Whereas I feel like Carry On movie is a vibe, you know, like, you know, if you want a vibe, you watch Carry On movie and you listen to like an album track of Prince's. But if you want like a sort of more like a finished song, and I think they have a different appeal. You know, and I've always been more into like, you know, tracks rather than people that would just go get stoned and dance to like something for like 4 hours. I'd rather listen to some serious lyrics.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
There's no right or wrong, and I think Carry On is get stoned, watch 4 hours of Carry On movies versus this is it for me. Like this is that. It's accessible form of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think on that same type of analogy, how I would put it for me is, yeah, this, you know, the Ladykillers is a Neil Young or a, you know, a Bob Dylan or, you know, singer-songwriter type song.
Yeah.
Whereas Carry On is more your Shakin' Stevens.
Oh, okay.
Do you know what I mean? It's I mean, it's kind of catchy, and if you were to put it on and I watched it for 10 minutes, yeah, I might be like,
yeah, but people love them.
I know. People love Shakin' Stevens.
Oh, I see. Okay.
But it doesn't, you know, and I think success isn't always the sign of quality, shall we say, you know. And I feel like that's the thing with Carry On films. I feel like, because that's what I thought this was going to be. I thought it was going to be a Carry On film. It was going to be, you know, on the nose, looks towards the camera like, you know, Sid James laughs, you know, that kind of thing. And a bit, you know, a bit saucy and a bit sort of Sunday afternoon flat comedy.
For me, I think what it reminds me of is that it's the same with music in a way, you know, like we don't, you know, all the music I listen to is old anyway. Generally, I do listen to some things, and with films, you know, I watch more old films than new ones. But I feel like it's just a reminder that, you know, this is early days of cinema, right? And it's just like people have been super cool for ages. You know, not Herbert Lom cool. I just mean people have had such great ideas for ages. You know, since before the first novel, you know, since way back, like thousands of years ago. And it's like, you know, it's really cool to see, you know, it's just weird to think of when you watch this movie that there weren't, after this, you know, you hadn't had Only Fools and Horses yet. You hadn't had Edward Scissorhands. I know it's just time and that's how it works, but it's like, you know, I guess, you know, you had like, you know, old stuff like Charlie Chaplin's and stuff.
Yeah,
like that.
and I think that's the thing. It's a good example of how something that's good is good regardless of time.
Yeah,
like there are those films that are great at the time, but you watch them 20 years later and they're like,
but there are no janky moments on this.
No, you can't see the seams. It doesn't feel like obviously filmmaking in 55 was very different to filmmaking now, but it's not like you can see how they cut corners, or you can see
I've just realised a lesson, Ryan, that we've learnt from Dirty Harry.
Okay.
When Dirty Harry at the end of Magnum Force kills the villain, what does he say? Like, man must know his limitations.
Yes, he
I
does
feel
say
like
that.
this knows its limitations. Like, it knows when to use the sort of weird set backdrops
Yeah,
that look
yeah.
fake. It knows when to have it in the real life. It knows when to crack a joke. Like, and it knows what it can't do yet. Like, and it feels like it exists within its, like, pushes art forward because it's telling a great story and something that's timeless with the characters that is still relevant today. But it's also, it knows not to have too many chase scenes that would be boring when they don't have the budget for it or something, or you know.
It knows its place, and it knows exactly what it can and can't do, and it doesn't try to run before it can walk. Like, there does seem to be, I mean, probably a lot of elements of that is probably we've only really got enough money to do the climax or the climactic endings scene where you see, you know, the kind of showdown between Alec Guinness and Herbert Lom. Can only really do that once. We can't do 3 or 4 scenes like that. We've only got enough budget for one. And
that's when it really opens up, doesn't it? Because the whole movie's just been in the house and there's been a bit of a robbery. But towards the end, it does feel like a real good climax, I think.
Yeah, it's totally surprising for me, because I genuinely didn't think it was going to go in this direction where all these people end up essentially killing each other. It feels very much like a Reservoir Dogs in some respects. Like, obviously nowhere near as violent or as, you know, Tarantino-esque, but it's the, you know, when you've got a load of criminals who only really look out for themselves and all they really want is the money, they kind of implode and they end up killing them, or they end up killing each other. And I mean, the way Alec Guinness dies, or he gets shot, but he doesn't look like he's going to die, and then that, you know, that
like a signal,
the train signal just bang hits him on the head is very, you know, and that's what I mean. Like, that is a very slapstick joke that you could have had 90 of in the film.
Yeah, but because there's like one,
because it's the dong.
Yeah,
it's one, and it's not every other scene. It's that. I think a lot of the comedy comes from the awkwardness of the situations rather than it being a overproduced funny thing where you go, like, you know, like a Carry On film where it's like, right, okay, we've got this scene, and Mrs. Wilberforce is having her friends over to watch you play. Okay, what we're going to have there? Oh, well, let's have, okay, so we're going to have one round. He's going to start playing the cello, and he's going to play it badly. And then they're all going to start looking around, and it's going to become very kind of slapstick. And then he breaks it because he's trying to play, you know, there would have been overproduced elements and overproduced, you know, Carry On style, very in your face. You know, it's trying to be funny at that point. There doesn't seem to be any subtlety to it, but it has all the subtlety, and it knows, right, we can do that one gag, but we can't really do that gag again. We've done that. We're not going to do it again. It, you know, it doesn't even do what I call the comedy trifecta, you know, where, what's a good example of a comedy trifecta? I can't think of one now, but essentially you see something done once, then you see it done a second time, and then on the third time it changes what you've seen. So it does it. So I'll link it back to Dr. Strangelove just because I saw that recently. In the stage show, I don't know if it's like this in the film because I've not seen the film, but in the stage show, Dr. Strangelove is a German scientist. And every time they mention the war, he goes, oh, I didn't really agree with that. Oh, such a horrible business. And his augmentated, like, mechanical arm then goes into a Nazi salute. And every time he has to pull it down. And it's quite funny. he does that once and goes, no, and goes 9. It's quite funny. Does it a second time, quite funny. The third time, he goes to grab his arm in expectation and his arm doesn't go up. That's what makes the third time funny.
Okay, fair.
You know, it doesn't really have those comedy trifectas, which I was expecting and wouldn't have been out of place. But a lot of the comedy comes from the dialogue and comes from the awkwardness of the situations, rather than it being an overly slapstick, carry on, you know, comedy music, comedy sounds in the background style of comedy. Doesn't really have any of that. So I kind of respect it an awful lot more because of it, when it could have just done what I was expecting.
Yeah, I didn't. You know, you like to think when you've seen a lot of movies, you can kind of see where most of them are going. So you'd think like one that was made over, over 60 years. How many years? 70 years?
70 years.
You'd think, if you were like, if you were like a bit ego-y, you might be like, I can kind of, it's just an old movie, I know where this is going. But, I couldn't see where it was going. And I think like, and I wasn't saying it was really tense or anything, but it was fun, and it stuck with me. And this sort of idea that, I don't know, like, what do you think, like, that crime doesn't pay if you are just a poor person doing, because, it's all it's very English in the way that, her house has got subsidence, and she's, she clearly can't, I guess, I guess she actually gets the money at the end, which I always forget, actually. But
yeah, because she says, oh, Mrs. Wilberforce, you've forgotten your umbrella. Oh, it's okay. I'll get another one.
But the money in the end is probably in better hands than it was at the beginning. Like, they stole the money from the bank. Yeah. It's gone to this lady that is clearly going to do good with it, I think.
Yeah, she's not being funny. She's probably going to try and sort out the subsidence in her house.
Yeah.
And create a better area for her parrots.
And she gives money to the homeless.
And he's like, I don't know how much she actually gives him, but obviously it's a lot more than your standard, average donation. And you just know that if the money had stayed in the hands of the Ladykillers, that it would have been, they'd have pissed it up the wall within 5 seconds flat.
You do know.
And they'd go and have to do another
5
one.
years later, they'd be doing
they'd go and
wouldn't
they would, yeah. You'd have another heist and another elaborate plan and another situation where they're having, obviously if they survive, that is, they'd have because I think that's the nature of those types of characters. I think there is a real kind of working class element to this as well. A lot of the areas you see feel very, people who have worked hard to get what they have and still have that. Mrs. Wilberforce obviously has. I don't think Mrs. Wilberforce is working class, but because of the effects of the war, has been thrust into the equivalent of a working class area, or her house has become, more in keeping of.
I guess she's widowed from the war, isn't she? And I mean, it would show that maybe, I don't think she was. She's got a big house, but then, God, I don't know what times were like back then. It was probably more people did just have bigger houses. Like a lot of, my great uncle Joey lived in a relatively big house in London, but he was just a market trader just because he'd had it from a young, So, and if what her husband was high up officer, I don't necessarily think it would make them super. And everyone, it's really hard to tell as well because everyone was sort of quite posh speaking, but everyone in movies back then spoke with a certain accent anyway. So it's like, I guess I don't really know if she's supposed to be. She's definitely
no. I don't think she's supposed to be, but I think it's an interesting depiction of the effects of the war. Obviously, you mentioned it earlier, and how has it affected these people? And I think perhaps this is where I'm picking up on it now, is that. Before the war, these people were probably, Mrs. Wilberforce was probably quite wealthy, probably had, her house was probably really, really lovely, really nice. And, you know, she did have her friends over for dinner and they listened to the quartets and, you know, I said the quartets like that's the name of a band, but I meant as in string quartets rather than like a Supremes knockoff type thing. Whereas obviously the effects of the war, like her house has obviously got subsidence.
It's a quintet.
Quintet. There we go. You know, her house has obviously got subsidence, and I wonder if that's probably due to like the Blitz and all the bombings that happened during the war. All of those kinds of things, and all of a sudden you see middle to upper class people have the effects of this war, and everybody's been affected by it. You know, so I think that's probably where the effects are most clear. I would probably say. I do want to mention Peter Sellers because when we were talking about this film before we ended up doing this recording, and before we chose to do this episode, I told you the story of Peter Sellers because I think everybody will probably know something of Peter Sellers without necessarily realising it. So whenever somebody does a Michael Caine impression, they always say, "My name is Michael Caine." Not a lot of people know that. Well, not a lot of people know that comes from Peter Sellers. So there's a really famous interview. I believe it's on Parkinson. Might not have been Parkinson, but one of those, you know, Parkinson-esque chat shows in the 70s. And he started doing an impression of Michael Caine, and he basically said that Michael Caine, for some reason, always seems to speak like he's reading from a Guinness World Records book. And he'd always like say like a fact. And he basically ends up saying, "Do you know that if a man in a tweed suit falls from the top of Big Ben to the ground, he will do it in 5 seconds flat?" And he ends that impression by going, "Now, there's not a lot of people who know that." And that's where that comes from.
Wow, so he invented the impression.
He obviously didn't invent the impression, but not a lot of people know that.
Yeah, but that is what people do.
Yeah, and
it's people still
I've even seen Michael Caine do it.
Really?
Yeah, he goes, "My name is Michael Caine." Not a lot of people know that. You know, and obviously for fans of Peter Sellers, they will know that instantly. And obviously, you know, things like, I've not really seen the Pink Panther films, and I probably wouldn't have done prior to watching this, but seeing Peter Sellers here and seeing his kind of physical-esque comedy in places, you know, like where he's been, chased by Herbert by One Round, and the way he's trying to get the gun out of his trousers when, you know, One Round is coming through the door. I'm going, oh, I can totally see why he plays Inspector Clouseau now then.
Oh, God, as well. Bloody One Round kills him because he thinks he's killed Miss Lopsided, they also call her, don't they?
Yeah.
But he hadn't. It's so quite...
Yeah, because she's there having a sleep, isn't she?
Yeah, she's sleeping.
But she looks like she's dead, you know.
Oh, it is good, this, isn't it? And it's one of those movies, it doesn't really need to be done again. Like, it's just one of those, which I think is always a good sign that it is the one. You know,
yeah, I mean, when there's a remake, you know, because there are good remakes.
Yeah.
Not every remake is bad. Sometimes remakes are better than, or become more well-known than the thing they're remaking. You know, we done a whole episode on The Thing. That was a remake. Same with our episode on The Fly. That was a remake. But not a lot of people know that. Without even realising it, I went straight into it. Yeah, so those are remakes. But obviously, a lot of remakes are usually terrible. Just to bring it back to another episode we've done, you know, the Total Recall remake, which I haven't seen. I've not seen it for good reason.
Yes,
it looks terrible.
RoboCop one was bad.
I've
not seen that, but I know it's bad.
That is terrible.
Yeah.
It takes out all of the social commentary and all of the brutality of it.
And adds loads of CGI.
Yeah, not even Gary Oldman could save it.
Who would want to be? I mean, in a theatre performance, yeah, do Ladykillers, but who would want to be 2025 new version of Ladykillers? Who's going to play Alec Guinness or any of those super amazing, you know, those sort of, I don't necessarily. I don't think we live in. I'm not saying like genius actors or like, but it's just very much it's there. I don't know, but I wouldn't be that interested, even if they got a load of the favourite people of this time. I wouldn't be that interested to see how they do it, because I just think, well, if you do it in a way that's not like Alec Guinness, I'm gonna just be like, well,
why didn't you do it like Alec Guinness?
Yeah, use the teeth.
Yeah.
And then if they do the one with the teeth, I'd be like, well, it's just the same as the old.
Yeah.
They wouldn't be able to win in my eyes.
Yeah, it's a difficult one, isn't it? And I think a big proportion of that comes from the fact that in those days, character actors were the norm. You didn't, movie actors were seen as like not proper actors. There is still an element of that, but it's not quite as. But in those days, you were a theatre actor who went on to film, and if you were only in film, it was a case of like, he's only a film actor, he doesn't know what he's doing. So character actors like Alec Guinness, like all of them, Peter Sellers is one of the greatest comedy character actors you could get of that era. This was one of his first films, if not his first film. If you're trying to do this today or even in 2004, there's your problem, is that the character actors you have are few and far between. So especially if you want names,
it'd probably work well on like be made for ITV.
Yeah, because you could probably do it on a smaller budget and not have to worry about, we've got to make this money back somehow. If it's on ITV or BBC, especially if it's on BBC, it don't really care if it's not that successful. Since some awful things on BBC, it doesn't really matter if it's not any good, because we'll just go and do another thing.
Then at that point, you get protective over things you think are good, don't you? Like, there ain't going to be another Dirty Harry. And I feel like, for me, I don't know why Ladykillers seems to live up to that sort of... I was quite surprised when I saw it, because I wasn't expecting to have a new film I love. And I was like, oh, wow, good. What else have I missed?
It does actually, I think that brings us on quite nicely to further watching, because one thing I will definitely be going back and watching that I never would have watched before, because I think a little bit because my first kind of, I suppose, introduction to the Pink Panther films wasn't the Peter Sellers ones. It was the piss poor remake with Steve Martin, and I didn't really like that at all. And so I'm not going to go back and watch what it was based off of. Obviously, you've got the cartoon as well, but that's totally different again. But I'm going to, I kind of want to go back and watch the Inspector Clouseau and the Pink Panther films, because I've gone, oh, well, I've watched the Ladykillers, and of course, Peter Sellers is going to be funny then, because he's great in this. And I suppose a big thank you to you, because as I said at the top of the episode, I would never have watched this film if you hadn't gone to see it and recommended it. And even after you recommended it, there was an element of going, do I?
But luckily,
do I? And it was
politeness, made you say yes.
Yeah,
your culture spoke for you.
Yeah, it did.
You can't really tell him.
Yeah, because I've definitely done that before. Confession time. You said, "Oh, you need to go and watch this film," and then like 3 years later, you've said, "Oh, did you watch it?" And I went, "No, I keep meaning to."
Yeah.
But you just know you're not going to like it. And I thought it was going to be this type of one here, but actually, I went, you know what? I am in a bit of a kick at the moment with just watching films, and films that I wouldn't ordinarily watch, just to experience. I think we can all get quite stuck in our ways, especially with what we like. My thing is horror films, so you don't really need to convince me to watch a horror film. I'll go and watch it. Going and watching The Ladykillers from 1955 was a bit like,
well, I'm not really into crime capers, and I think that it has enough of that weirdness to it. Like the Crooked House is enough, and just the performance from Alec Guinness and some of the things that just are a bit theatrical about it is why I love this movie. The fact it's not just straight-laced five guys in a woman's house and, you know, taking advantage. Taking advantage.
Yeah, might want to be careful how you phrase that.
But you know, it's not
Poor Mrs. Wilberforce.
It's the theatrical silliness of it and the gritty reality that's how I see life. You know, like you can 1 minute walk down the road and get shat on by a bloody seagull, and then the next day something a tragedy happens. You know, like it's this sort of. I think the movies that can have both of that in it, like the sort of grittiness and the silliness, for me, you know, that's the Wicker Man. You know, that's for me. That's the films that sort of I go, God, that feels real to me.
Yeah, like in one sense, it's totally unrealistic depiction of real life, but in another sense, it is totally realistic. How life doesn't know that you're having a good time; it just happens. And sometimes it's good, sometimes it's crap, sometimes it's funny, sometimes it's sad. It just fucking happens.
Yeah.
And, you know, watching this, I was like, I keep going back to how surprised I was at it, because it is that thing of going, why am I laughing at them dropping a man's body onto a train? Why am I laughing at that? Because that's really fucked up. It's not, you know, and it's not presented as being a fucked up thing.
It's exhilarating.
Yeah, I'm laughing at it. I'm laughing at it because Alec Guinness is doing this with his fucked up teeth and his wispy hair.
Yeah.
And I'm laughing at it because they've just spent 10 minutes chasing him on a roof rather than just saying, Major, come down, and going, well, let's wait until he comes down because he's got to come down. That's how we get the money. We wait until he comes off the roof. No, let's follow him up onto the roof and chase him around the roof, and ultimately he falls to his death.
Yeah.
You know, it's ludicrous, but it's also makes you laugh at a time when you're going, oh, somebody has just died, but that's quite funny.
Yeah.
You know, and it's that, you know, it is that gallows humour. You know, I can always remember my dad telling me about when my nan died. I was only a little sprog. I was about 2. But he said, you know, it was a really weird feeling. Obviously, you're very sad. He's just lost his mum, and, you know, his brothers are all there, and it's very sad. But they all get into the limo that takes you to the crematorium, and they're just looking around at each other, and for some reason they just start laughing. And he said it was so weird. We went past. I think he told me this. I might just be ad-libbing this now. But I think he said this. He said they went past this, you know, and it was the old thing in those days, not so much now. Used to get, you know, blokes in the flat caps would doff the cap to, you know, a hearse going past. And he said there was a bloke and he doffed his cap to, obviously the hearse went past, and then the limo behind went past, and it was like his look on his face as he saw these 4 blokes in the back of a limo following a hearse laughing. And it's that thing of going, why were we laughing? And it's just, I think it was a way of just letting out emotion, and in a really horrible, sad time. And I think that's the biggest kind of takeaway from the Ladykillers in a slightly more philosophical sense, is there are these dark, horrible things that happen, but the way we get through them is to look for the things that are either funny or the things that are light, or look for that silver lining. You know, the silver lining in this whole story is Mrs. Wilberforce gets all the money, and the police don't think she's part of the heist.
Yeah,
you know, and they wouldn't think she's part of the heist because she's spending, you know, all these years. Because at the start they mention like UFOs.
Yeah, I'm not quite.
Which is really like out of place in a 50s film that isn't a science fiction film.
Yeah.
Because I was like, and then it's not really mentioned at all again.
No. What did she say? She's seen UFOs again or something?
Well, it's the police officer refers to something she'd seen, and he says, you know, flying saucers and that. So I don't know, because I don't think it really goes into it, but it, you know, it has that full circle moment where that's the reason she in her head, that's the reason she gets away with not being involved in the heist, is because they don't believe me.
Yeah.
You know, I think it's probably more likely a thing of even if they did believe her.
Well, I think at the end she thinks they let her have the money. She goes,
Yeah,
"Oh, that's
yes,
okay, Miss
yeah,
Wilberforce.
yeah.
You keep that. That's yours."
Because even now, the Britishness of her still believes that yes, they were doing. They killed each other. Oh no, they think she thinks they all left, doesn't she? Because she was asleep through all of this,
okay.
which again is quite a funny thing. You know, all of these people die in and around her house,
She's having a nap.
and she's having a nap
Because she's old.
Yeah,
And I am still convinced. I will just say I'm still convinced that one of the policemen was cottoned onto it. But Christina, and I think you say, I don't really think they thought that, and I think you might be right. But part of me, I'd have to do 2 more rewatches to. But I still have it in my head that one of those police officers kind of. I feel like he might know, but maybe I'm just being totally dumb. I might be wrong.
I think it's open to interpretation a little bit. But yeah, the Britishness of that is that even though all of these people who clearly weren't, straight-laced people, clearly had ulterior motives, clearly were criminals, and ended up, okay, she didn't know, but ended up killing each other, she still believes that they're telling the truth about her being involved. It's like, well, why would I believe that? Then, why would I believe that everything else they've told me is a lie? Yeah. They're not a quintet. They're not here to practice for their concert. They're here to, all of the things that they've been told or they've told her have been a lie. But because of the Britishness of her, she still believes that one element where she's, oh God, yes, the police are going to, God, the police, what are the police going to think of me? It's like, well, tell them the truth,
Yeah.
Well, no, I can't do that. They're going to put me in prison, So, just to bring it back to further watching, because I realise we went on a bit of a tangent again. I'd say the Pink Panther series for a bit more Peter Sellers. I think it would be intriguing to watch purely from a place of I wonder what it's like point of view, watching the 2004 version.
Yeah.
But with the mindset of it's not going to be what the 55 version is. But just I wonder how different it is. I wonder where it falls down and where is there any good parts about it.
Yeah, I've enjoyed some Coen Brothers movies, so I don't necessarily think it was made by necessarily the wrong people or anything. So it would be interesting to see. But yeah, for me, I stuck the trailer on pretty much after watching that, and I was like, oh dear. Like for me, it was the Tom Hanks character in it. Just seemed it's very Coen Brothers the way it looks. Like they like setting films in the sort of deep south, that sort of time.
Yeah,
and I think, but I guess I just, after sitting through one caper, this one, I'd happily watch this one again, but I don't really need to. It's the same stuff I said earlier. I don't need to go somewhere else just to see a similar little thing happen, but slightly worse.
I think you could probably also watch, 70s and 80s British sitcoms, thinking of things like, oh, why can I not think of his name? Hancock's Half Hour. Things like Reginald Perrin, even things like Yes, Minister, Only Fools and Horses, all of those, because they're all kind of influenced by this style of movie.
She's a bit of a hyacinth, isn't she?
Yeah.
She's a hyacinth.
Yeah.
Hey, what's that one called?
That is,
Keeping Up Appearances.
Keeping Up Appearances.
Yeah.
And for those...
But she's not as charactery as her.
No.
I love a hyacinth, but she's more.
She doesn't
realistic.
feel like her name isn't pronounced how it is. For those who haven't seen Keeping Up Appearances, the biggest joke is that her name is Hyacinth Bucket, but she pronounces it bouquet.
Good Life is a good one.
Good Life, yeah. But all of those have that same. I think there probably is vibe.
Porridge.
Yeah, Porridge is another good one. Two Ronnies, which is a sketch show, but they all have that same British comedy kind of vibe. And this is obviously, British Ealing comedy, but they were all influenced by this style. And, you know, you mentioned Hot Fuzz, and, you know, even things like Peep Show, you could probably find some influences from the way things were done, you know.
Even, I mean, God, you know, one of your favourites from that time and mine, but I didn't go into as deeply as you guys, with the Pens, Pauline.
Yeah, League of Gentlemen.
I mean,
yeah.
Alec Guinness doing a cameo in League of Gentlemen wouldn't have been totally.
It
would have fit that well.
It does feel a little bit, you know, Tubbs and David Tatzer, doesn't it? It's kind of grotesque, and, you know, the teeth, it's a little bit odd looking. It feels very, and even, to be honest, when he first gets revealed, feels a little bit like when you first see the local shop for local people.
And
you know,
it
has
doesn't
that.
He go, I hear you have some rooms for
Yeah, I hear you have some rooms for that. It's a very, you know, it is very, you know, you can see those influences, and okay, on the face of it, you may be thinking, what? League of Gentlemen and the Ladykillers, where's the link there? But watch them kind of in quick succession, and you can kind of see those, you know, that very British style of comedy, albeit different, you know, versions of British comedy, but they all have that kind of same vibe and that same groundedness that makes British comedy what it is.
The one I would say is definitely a good one for this is, and I've mentioned it before because it's just one of those films I often bring up, but you know, a movie with an older lady as a sort of a leading character, a movie that has quite sentimental in a way and has a lot of heart, but is also a dark comedy with dark scenes in, is Harold and Maude. He's like that, Ryan. You would find that rather exhilarating. I think.
Exhilarating.
Yeah, I would say. And if you trusted me on that one, I think you got to trust me on that one.
Yeah, I think, and perhaps the best of those British sitcoms for me is Only Fools and Horses, and it's very similar. It's set in, it's set in, you know, London. They are wheeler dealer characters, and I mentioned earlier about the way in which the Ladykillers kind of, you know, excuse themselves from what they've done, and where they explain to Mrs. Wilberforce. And I realised I used the wrong example. The example from Only Fools and Horses is when he's talking to Rodney about basically he says to Rodney, he says, you know, we don't get supplementary benefit, we don't get housing benefit, we don't claim this, we don't claim that, but on the other hand, we don't, you know, let me rephrase. He says, you know, yes, okay, we don't pay VAT, we don't pay income tax, we don't pay corporation tax, but on the other hand, we don't claim supplementary benefit, we don't claim housing benefit. And then he says, we don't give the government, the government don't give us nothing, so we don't give the government nothing, you know. And it's a way of him kind of excusing the criminality of what they're doing. And I think much like,
but it's kind of reasonable.
Yeah, unlike the Ladykillers, what makes Del Boy the character lovable is the fact that he always means well, particularly with his family. He may do it in a slightly underhanded way, but he always means well. I think that's what makes him the difference between that type of petty criminal and the Ladykiller type of criminal, where they don't always mean well. They just want to get a quick buck.
I get the impression like the Ladykillers are more like some people they would come across and have dealings with. You know, like you know when you first meet Boise, the gambling table.
Yeah,
he
or even the Driscoll brothers.
Yeah, yeah. They feel more like characters that they would come across. But, you know, they're a bit more similar. They're a bit more similar to the Lady Lopsided in this, I think. I feel like they're more likely to accidentally be used. You know what I mean? I feel like Derek and Rodney are more likely to be used in someone else's plot to rob a bank rather than...
Yeah, a bit. Well, it's a bit like the episode where the
Shadow one.
Yeah. There's that. Well, they're the type of criminal that I feel like One Round is. He gets mixed up in the wrong type of thing, and he's actually got a very good heart. Obviously, it pushes it a bit further, but because they're always doing something that's a bit shady, and
They're smuggling the diamond. Don't they smuggle?
They smuggle, they smuggle diamonds.
Because it all goes wrong at the end.
It all goes wrong, and Slater steals the diamonds.
Yeah.
And whilst Boise does give him 10 grand, they throw it off the balcony because Dell thinks it's a schneid 10 grand, but he doesn't know it's real because Boise couldn't do that to a friend.
Yeah, I get you.
But there's even an earlier episode where he meets these 2 Indian gentlemen from 2 different families, and they spin him this story that they're from different castes and they can't talk to each other, but he's got my family heirloom ornament. So Dell thinks, and this is where the moral of the story comes a little bit. Dell immediately, wheeler-dealery, thinks, I know how I can make a bit of money here. We'll speak to this bloke and say he's offered $1,000, and we'll speak to that bloke and say he's offered $2,000. We get the $2,000, we give in the $1,000, and we pocket the other $1,000. So he's trying to schneid the others out of $1,000, whereas what he doesn't know is that they're actually in on it together, and he's out $2,000 altogether, because he ends up going, well, I won't part with my money until I've got it in my hand. So they go, we'll sell all our stuff, get the $2,000, we'll go and buy the ornament, we'll give the ornament back to him, he'll give us the $2,000, and we're up. But it never quite works out for him, because
of course, it never does.
Yeah, and that's kind of the thing. And I think here, obviously we've gone on a bit of massive tangent, but that's kind of the similarity in the influence that you can see, where they're trying to make a quick buck and it doesn't work out for them. They're always trying to make a quick buck and always trying to, undercut people, and it never quite works out for him. There's, this time next year we'll be millionaires. In that sort of thing, it's the thing of going, yeah, but you've got this great deal that is going to make you loads of money, but in a couple of months' time, you're going to be going, we've got no money, Rodders.
Yeah, of course.
We're going to have to do another. We're going to have to do another, another great deal.
Yeah.
So that's where the influence is immediately, is in Only Fools and Horses, and I think that for me is the epitome of British comedy, particularly of that era. So
and. Ryan, how would a more American movie, by the way? So not a sitcom thing, but I think similar sort of. If I was to think of an American version that wasn't just the rip off of this, I'd think of something like that. Maybe it's not very often you see like an older lady as a main character in a movie, apart from maybe in like some sort of period drama stuff.
And it's usually
I'm thinking of unless I'm missing something really obvious.
No, I think you're right. Usually they're a peripheral character or a supporting character, where the protagonist or the main character is doing something for that older character. Obviously, there are films where there are, but generally speaking, they're few and far between.
Wicked Little Letters is a bit of a caper. It's a more of a modern throwaway one, but because it's in Littlehampton, we'll give it a pass. Yeah. All right.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Bury Our Bones with Cinema. We really appreciate you joining us as we deep dive into the world of film. Be sure to follow us on all of our social media pages to keep up with all of our latest content and updates. You can find us on YouTube, TikTok and Instagram at Bury Our Bones with Cinema. You've been listening to Jimmy Murphy, Simon Keet and Ryan Etherington. We'll see you next time for more cinematic discussions and buried treasures. Until then, don't forget to keep your bones buried in the world of cinema. And it will be a one-button job. Boom, 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 toom, toom, toom.
I have a terrible tendency to just scroll about and read. But you're talking, when we're doing it, I still find it slightly distracting.
It's a bit weird, but I think it's a bit suppose.
Maybe if you listen to it back, see if it sounds. I was like, I'm gonna have to stop it. You listen to it back,
Good job I observed that well, wasn't it?